And is he carrying this series over next semester? Do you know,
No.
Nate? No. So we're starting something new. Okay. So this lesson, of course, is lesson 9, so it's not really a conclusionary kind of lesson. But as you deal with these foundational principles that he's been going over, this one we're getting into, it's called Meet the Isms. And so one of the biggest thing with regard to the different isms is kind of understanding and appreciating maybe the way some other people in our culture think. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. There's not a whole lot of Bible in this lesson. Just to be frank with you, there's a couple of verses we're going to look at as some examples of some of this mindset. But as we look at it, it's really for us to just kind of understand a little bit better as to how the world around us is thinking, and to try to explore those kind of mindsets, so we'll have an idea when we're approaching or talking to each other, to kind of see exactly how they are thinking and what they are thinking in this world around us. Y'all could probably teach this lesson as well as I could, just because you're living right smack dab in the middle of a lot of these things. And so, it's one of those things that will probably make a lot more sense to you, just because you know it and understand it. I'm trying to find, where did I save it? Goodness. Just open it. This thing. All right, so it's kind of like he talked about going down a rabbit hole is kind of the way this lesson is introduced and kind of talked about. And it really you can go in a lot of different directions with regard to thinking about, these different areas and these different mindsets. And we start talking, as we're going to talk about atheism, agnosticism. We're going to talk about, see what's other isms. Give you the overview here. See, agnosticism, skepticism, and deism are the 4 primary ones that we're going to talk about. There's a couple other ones if we have time to talk about, we will. But the problem is, once you start going down the road into these different mindsets and think about these different distinctive kind of doctrines or theories or systems of thinking, you can't really pigeonhole everyone into one group. Does that make sense? I mean, there's always kind of little offshoots. There's always kind of things that you can kind of go down. That's kind of where the idea of going down a rabbit hole can really go. I don't know how many of y'all have ever gotten caught, and I have all the time. I can get on YouTube and you start clicking on one video and then you watch that one and it clicks you to the next one, or you click on the next one and it just starts playing. Before you know it, you're sitting there for 45 minutes and you've watched 5 cat videos or dog, anyways. Do it on Instagram sometimes. And you kind of just get caught in this rabbit hole of going down one direction and then you kind of keep going down, and it kind of provokes all kinds of different thoughts, concepts, and it kind of gets you stuck there kind of thinking about where am I going? Like Alice in Wonderland, which is the illusion here, obviously. She goes down the rabbit hole and goes in this wonderland, and this is this fanciful, imaginative world of all kinds of crazy creatures and situations and circumstances where you just kind of get stuck trying to figure things out, because there's so much that is thrown at you at one point in time. That's kind of where you think about when you deal with these isms, is that you can kind of go down the rabbit trail, so to speak, when you're thinking about these different type of world views that we think that we have, that we surround ourselves with. And I will say, I know most of y'all at Faulkner. Okay, yes, everybody not at Faulkner. Okay, well, besides Isabel, I know where you are. We're in Christians and colleges, and so we're surrounding ourselves with people who are similar mindset most of the time. There's some, as you well know, that are around you that may not think exactly just like you. And there are some that maybe aren't Christians, or some that may not have that kind of a thought process in their minds that may fit maybe one of these categories. But when you get in the real world, it's very obvious. And I will just tell you, I've been working as an attorney this is my 20th year. And so, in the 20 years that I have practiced law, you see and surround yourself by a lot of different people and their different approaches on the world, whether it's a judge or a jury or an individual witness, a cop. Those kind of, you have all different viewpoints that are very interesting to kind of think about how they approach the world and why they do what they do. And that's kind of what it goes down to with regard to this, because an ism is kind of categorized or defined as a distinctive doctrine, theory, system, or practice. And so as we kind of walk through these ideas of being these different mindsets, just kind of keep in mind, one, we're saying it's distinctive, but the reality is that it becomes, as you start exploring it, maybe not as distinctive, because there's a wide spectrum of maybe atheists. And kind of, wait a second, where do they really fall? Agnosticism, that's going to be probably one of the bigger ones, where you have these people who say we really just can't know, or we don't know which way to go. They're very indecisive. So it becomes one of these things where you may not be able to clearly define, or it may not be as distinctive as we want it to be. We're going to try and talk about it in terms that are distinctive, but keep in mind that in theory and practice, sometimes these things are not as distinctive as maybe we would want them to be. I like it when it's very black and white, where it's very distinctively different, because it helps my mind wrap myself around something. I don't know if y'all are like that or not. I don't like living in the grays, just because those gray areas are murky with regard to my understanding and my application as to what I should do as a Christian. And so that sometimes happens even in these different types of viewpoints. You kind of have the crossovers, or maybe the wording and the verbiage from people who the proponents of it, who really are like, wait a second, you say you're an atheist, but you're saying it like this. You almost sound agnostic. And I don't know if you've ever read any of these writings, but that's kind of where you get to sometimes with some of them. But anyways, just on its face value, though, these isms are supposed to be very different, distinctive theories, systems of practice, systems of thinking, practice. And so that's kind of what we're looking at here. So first I want to look at atheism. Again, I'm going to scoot through this pretty quick, because I think there's like 60-something slides. I don't know how he ever thought I would ever get through 60-something slides. If he's ever been in one of my classes, that's never happens. But some of them are like this. They just have like a nice, pretty title. So, but atheism is the first one. So as we think about atheism, literally the word atheism means without God. And so it comes from the Greek word, and I don't want to get in a big Greek lesson, but means opposite, and so, or without. And so means without, theos means God. So atheism is where you get without God. From the Greek. So, but some of the definitions that we see around us in the world are some of these right here from dictionary.com. You have this one, the doctrine or belief that there is no God, or disbelief in the existence of a supreme being or beings. And so atheism really comprises here not just the belief of a singularity God, or the triune God, as we might say, the Trinity, but also just the idea of any kind of sovereign existence of supreme beings or beings in general as well. And so you just think about like the Greek mythology or the Roman gods that they've had in times past, where they had these multiple polytheistic societies, all these different gods. Well, atheists would not believe in any of those gods, because they believe in no God, according to this definition here. Another definition we see from Merriam-Webster says it's a lack of belief or strong disbelief in the existence of a God or any gods. 2, a philosophical or religious position characterized by disbelief in the existence of a God or any gods. And then 3, godlessness, especially in conduct. So I think it's very interesting to think about this. I actually used that third point in my lesson in the auditorium on Wednesday night. I was talking about Ephesians chapter 4, the different 7 ones that you read there, and the last one was one God. And so one of the points that I made in the lesson is, how can we not preserve the unity of the faith, or the unity of the Spirit, by not considering that there's one singular God? And it really could be our conduct. I call it practical atheism, because it's the idea that in practice you are acting as though there is no God. And that's really what this third definition to me actually says, that it's godlessness, especially in conduct. It's acting in a way as though there is no God. You may profess that there's God, that you believe in a God, but in fact, the way and the things that you do indicate that you really don't. Because if you did, you wouldn't be doing things that you do. And so I think it's interesting that this definition of atheism puts into context that conduct, that not necessarily a belief, but it's actually the conduct showing that there is no God, was defined as atheism. And here's the third one here, dealing with Britannica.com's entry, where it talked about comprehensive definition of atheism. And so an attempt is made to consider what is the most adequate definition of atheism, and to better capture the full range of atheistic thought. And so the resulting definition of atheism in that study and on that site says that atheism is the critique and the denial of the central metaphysical beliefs of systems of salvation involving a belief in God or spiritual beings. Man, that's deep. it's more inclusive than just saying there is no God, if you look at it, right? The atheism here with regard to the definition here is the denial of central metaphysical beliefs. That would be kind of the idea of those things beyond the normal senses. That's what metaphysical really means. Those things beyond our five senses, what is perceptible into the five senses. So those beliefs from the non-sensical, the non-physical, metaphysical beliefs, the systems of salvation involving a belief in God or in spiritual beings. And so the concept of atheism, as you see after reading these definitions, I think you can kind of see it's really an all-inclusive type of philosophy. And it's not just the idea of I don't believe that there's a God, but it's even more than that. It's I don't necessarily believe there's any God, and nor do I believe there's anything that's going to be some system of salvation or some system of governance based upon something that I cannot sense with my own self. Those metaphysical beliefs. Because in reality, if you are a Christian, if you believe in the Bible, if you believe in the God of the Bible, you are believing in things that you cannot touch. You will not be able to see. And so obviously atheism is in denial of all those things. And we'll get to some of that a little bit more as we get into the lesson, hopefully, as we think about what we're able to actually sense and perceive ourselves and how that impacts our faith. But that's the general definitions of the atheism. Look real quickly at a couple of demographics, and Jeremy put some of these in here, and I like looking at this because this is kind of where we're at now. And I found this kind of disheartening as I looked at it, and from a 2018-2019 survey by the Pew Research Center, that research and that study said that 4% of American adults say they are atheists. And that is up from 2% just 9 years earlier. So in 9 years, that amount doubled from just 2% that said they're atheists to now 4% saying they're atheists. I don't know what it would necessarily be now, because here we are 2023. That's even 4 years removed from this survey, so that could be even up even more than 4%. We may be up at 5, 6% now. There's going to be a lot of studying done about post-COVID world, and I'm really anxious to see how that comes out in the next year or two. Whenever you start thinking about those surveys and think about how did COVID affect us. You've probably seen some of those surveys. If you're in education, you may have seen that. Are you all in education? Okay, so I don't know if y'all talked about that or not, but I mean the whole post-COVID world with regard to education, there's been a lot of studies that are out there talking about how that negatively impacted learning in the classroom because, children weren't there physically. They were trying to do everything remotely, and that did not give the impact or the influence on the children as they want. So I'm kind of anxious to see, I say all that, I'm anxious to see how it impacts the church and Christianity and even the idea of belief in God. Because, how did people feel during COVID? Most people would say they felt kind of lonely. There was a vast desire to actually return back to services or to be together with people because you were so isolated because of the stupid social distancing. And so, I say stupid, I should have said that. But, those kind of, that mentality of, hey, we got to be away from each other to make sure that we all survive. That impacted us in many different ways, socially, educationally, I think spiritually. And so I'm kind of anxious to see down the road how this does impact this. But I think it's very interesting that even in 2018, you had 4% saying that they are atheists, and 10% don't believe in God or a higher power or in a spiritual force of any kind. So you can take that what you may. I think it's interesting you kind of have those two different statistics there that are kind of similar. But 10% don't believe in God or a higher power or in a spiritual force of any kind. So I guess they're saying here, some people's definition probably in their mind of atheist is just a belief in a singular God. And then so you have 4% that say they're atheists. And then you have 10% that don't believe in any kind of higher power at all. Which that's kind of disheartening if you think about it. 10%. That's a lot of people. And I don't know, I didn't dig into this survey to actually see ultimately how many they polled and that kind of stuff. But that is kind of disheartening. And this is roughly 1 in 5 self-described atheists say they do believe in some kind of higher power, but none of them that were surveyed believe that God is described in the Bible as that higher power. So very interesting. You say I'm an atheist, but yet they do believe in some type of higher power, but they're just saying it's not the God of the Bible. That's not what I believe. There's something else out there. So maybe it's the God, maybe of some other religion that you have that, and it's not the biblical God. But you have those kind of things that influence them, and they have a recognition of that higher authority, but it's just not the singular God you read about in the Bible. But So think about this. Some descriptions or conflicting descriptions possibly as you think about and just as we explore the concept of atheism. It becomes clear that there's some significant differences of opinion among those who claim to be atheists, as I've already said. And so it's kind of this, you want it to be this very distinctive viewpoint, but in fact, you almost have to dig deeper as to what do you mean you're an atheist? That's kind of needs to be your follow-up question. If you're talking to someone who protests and says that they are an atheist, it's kind of like, okay, well, let's make sure we're defining that term very well. When I get in discussions with individuals, that's always important. And I would encourage you to think about that when you are discussing it with anybody, friends, family, whatever it is. When you're talking about a concept, make sure you're on the same page of what the definition of that concept is. Because unfortunately, so many today have varied definitions or viewpoints on what a word or a concept means. You could say, I'm talking about politics. Well, what is politics to you? You know, you need to define what politics is. Are we talking about local politics, state politics, national politics? Are we talking about political parties and we're just kind of labeling it as politics? If you start defining the terms, it helps you understand that viewpoint, that vantage point of the person that you are discussing it with. And I think spiritual matters, obviously, that's even more important. But when you deal with atheism, you're going to have the different descriptions and kind of let them look at, and what I want to do is look at some of the things that they describe in their own words and compare it to what we've talked about these different definitions of this ism being atheism for it. So the American atheists say this: atheism is not an affirmative belief that there is no God, nor does it answer any other question about what a person believes. And to be clear, atheism is not a disbelief in gods or a denial of gods. It's a lack of belief in gods. And so you see that these two different quotes. One more quote here from American Atheist. If atheism is a religion, then not collecting stamps is a hobby. And so what they're saying is that really it's not religion. They're not saying atheism is the celebration of not having a God. It's just the idea and the acceptance of them in their minds, the fact that there is, it's just a disbelief in what it is. So I'm saying it's not disbelief, it's a lack of belief in gods. And so it's not disbelief. So again, you're getting the nuances, and really, I think when you start dissecting the English language, we can get really nitpicky with regard to the words. But I mean, these nuances are important when you're talking to individuals of how you're going to approach them as well. So it's good to kind of know this kind of thing. But as you see from this group of atheists, they don't have an affirmative belief. It says they say they don't have an affirmative belief that there is no God. And they would define atheism more as disbelief or lack of belief. The same group of atheists cites a recent study from the University of Kentucky reporting that as many as 26% of Americans may actually be atheists, according to this more relaxed description and interpretation. I always, of course, in my mind, question why are they trying to expand this? And I don't know if it's for funding or if it's for just inclusiveness, or maybe they want to try and see and show that they have a larger impact, maybe with regard to it. But it's kind of like they're not wanting to be pigeonholed into one little definition. They're really wanting it to be more expansive with regard to it. But so let's look at the another thing that Jeremy points out here is he's looking at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So let's look at this and see what they published an article, and here's some quotes from that with regard to atheism and the description of atheism that they have they found with regard to this philosophy. And so here's a couple of those quotes. It says, atheism is not the absence of the psychological condition of believing that God exists, which I think that's interesting. It's not the absence of the psychological condition of believing that. It's kind of like they're trying to minimize the fact that they do have beliefs, but here it's not the absence of that believing. It's just kind of a strange way to approach it here. But here's something further they said. The A in atheism must be understood as a negation instead of absence, as not instead of without. So, again, without God is what we said it technically would mean, right? Because that's what the and atheism would mean, without God. But what they're saying is, instead of understanding it like that, you need to understand it as being not. So no, or not God, or no God. So again, very minute change in that description with regard to it. The article goes on to say, therefore, in philosophy at least, atheism should be construed as the proposition that God does not exist. This definition has the added virtue of making atheism a direct answer to one of the most important metaphysical questions in philosophy of religion, namely, is there a God? And then here, there are only two possible direct answers to this question: yes, which is theism, and no, which is atheism. So again, I mean, we can kind of parse the language there, but I think it's very interesting to look at this, and as we think about the views on atheism by atheists themselves, you kind of get to see a little bit of some different ways. And one thing, to break this down a little bit, let's look at 5 different ways that kind of to look at it, look at atheism and think about the ideas of atheism. So I'm going to have to go over these quick because there's no way we're going to have time to get into all these necessarily. But one way they look at it is being a positive versus negative. So again, the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy says atheism is the view that there is no God. It has come to be widely accepted that to be an atheist is to affirm the non-existence of God. Anthony Flew called this positive atheism, whereas a lack of belief that God or gods exist is a negative atheism. So that's kind of, again, I really don't care which way it is. I mean, you kind of approach it the same way with regard to proving that there is a God. But what atheists would say to you is there's kind of 2 different ways to think about it. You have this positive atheism that says, hey, we're saying that God does not exist. But then you'd have this negative atheist who says there's just a lack of belief. It's kind of like there's a void there that could be filled, but they don't have that belief. Does that make sense? It's positive versus a negative mindset with regard to positive. Like, I'm positive God does not exist. A negative atheist is going to be the one who says, well, there's just not enough proof, or there's not enough belief, or there's not enough, there is no belief that God exists because you haven't shown it to me. So you kind of see that approach. Narrow versus wide. This kind of thinks about the idea of what we're talking about God here. So narrow is the idea of an atheist who believes that there is no singular God. A wide atheist does not believe that any gods exist, including the God that we read about in the Bible. And so you kind of see that kind of an idea about atheism. So again, we really want to kind of say atheism is this one kind of pigeonholed category, but as we're looking at it here, you see it's a little bit more diverse as the world is around us with regard to. So belief versus knowledge is another approach that you think about atheism. And so if you go back to the American Atheists, they have this to say about atheism: if you call yourself a humanist, a free thinker, a bride, or even a cultural Catholic and lack belief in a God, then you are an atheist. So don't shy away from the term, embrace it. Agnostic isn't just a weaker version of being an atheist. It answers a different question altogether. We'll get to agnosticism in a second. But atheism is about what you believe. Agnosticism is about what you know. And so that's where you see here this idea and difference they try to parse between atheism and agnosticism is the idea that atheism deals with the believing. Agnosticism is going to be dealing more with the knowing. And so I think that's kind of an interesting dichotomy there with regard to those two. Intellectual versus practical. And so we've talked about, I mentioned this a moment ago, but you think about the idea of intellectual atheism. You could have significant intellectual differences regarding the precise meaning of atheism, but it is certainly the case that many live their lives in a very practical way as if they don't believe in God. And so you kind of see the difference there between being an intellectual atheist or being a practical atheist. So a practical atheist may go by many names, even possibly calling themselves a Christian, but the lifestyle betrays an observable and evident lack of belief in God. So you can see that in the scriptures. So belief system versus lack of belief. Is atheism a belief system or is it a lack of belief? Well, it really depends on the atheist you ask. And so I don't want to delve too much more deeper into this with regard to it, but what you see is the question is going to be ultimately that the only common thread that ties all atheists together is a lack of belief in gods. This is because atheists do not have a common belief system, sacred scripture, or an atheist pope. Also, this means that atheists often disagree on many issues and ideas, and we are as unique as our fingerprints. And so it's very interesting that you think about here that, when you read what they had to say about things, I think it's interesting that they even say, the atheists, that we're as unique as our fingerprints. But they also are saying, hey, we have this wide range of beliefs even as atheists. And so, again, practically speaking, I guess the question is, what does this mean to you? Dealing with atheism, and that's a large, I guess, span or variety of atheists. What does it say to you? What does it mean to you? How would this affect us? And I am open for your comments today.
I think the view of there's just not enough evidence to believe in God is an easy way to show an atheist who believes that evidence that the evidence that there is a God.
Okay. The mindset, to me, if that's where you're starting from, is a lot easier maybe to handle, is what you're saying, than someone who's a hardcore, I don't believe in God, that He exists. You're starting from different points, and I agree with you. I think practically speaking, that means to us we can approach it in a different way, and maybe an easier way, if that's where we know they're coming from. Agreed. Any other thoughts?
I found it interesting when the intellectual versus practical, where you said the practical could even be people who call themselves Christians but don't practice.
You know, and I will say that's kind of one of my biggest themes, and I harped a lot of it on in the auditorium a little bit Wednesday night when I talked about that, because there are a lot of us, I mean, even those of us who will be meeting here today to worship God on the first day of the week together, who might be practical atheists. And it's really sad and sobering when you think about it. And that's because, they're going to come here and they're going to say they believe in God and they want to, be a Christian and they want to live a Christian life. But then practically, what are they doing? How does that influence their life? And I will say the practical atheists, even those who name themselves Christians, make it very difficult for us to talk to those who may be intellectual atheists, right? I mean, it makes it very difficult because they use that against us. It's saying, well, so-and-so says he's a Christian, but look at what he does. She did this and she does that. She's not a Christian. She says she is. Why do I want to be a part of that? Those kind of course, we hear the word hypocrite, but that's kind of what you deal with when you deal with practical atheists, because they're coming here and they're attesting one thing by what they're saying, they're speaking, but yet when we go out in the world around us, we are acting in a complete different way. And to me, that hits a little bit home to me. More so than a lot of this other stuff, because I don't want to be that way. I want to try everything I can to avoid that. So anyway, here a couple deductions here, and we're going to have to move on here quickly with regard to this. It does not, atheism does not provide a good alternative to belief in God. And so whenever you have someone who professes to be an atheist, and some of them try to say, well, this is the better option. I'm not going to put myself in with all of them who don't act like Christians when they say they're Christians, or those kind of things. The bottom line is atheism does not provide a good alternative. All the byproducts of atheism, if you really were to go to the ultimate extent, and people don't always want to go there, right? But if you're an atheist, you believe there is no God, let's just say we're just total atheists, we believe in Darwin's theory of evolution, and we're going down that road, survival of the fittest matters. That means, I can go kill whoever I want to kill. And there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, you could say, I guess there's rules and laws and whatnot, but, why does that matter? If there is no God and the survival of the fittest matters and I'm the strongest one and I survive, then that should be the way of things. No one wants to go down that road, do we? I mean, that's the thing. That's the ultimate argument. Nobody wants to go that far. You're going to hear atheists trying to pull back from that and try to argue from it, but they cannot avoid that ultimate argument of that slope. It's a slippery slope that you go down when you start saying, hey, survival of the fittest makes all the sense. That's what it is in this world around us. Well, not really. Where's your sense of morality come from? Where's our sense of right and wrong come from? I don't think anybody in this room is going to say it's okay to go out there and murder somebody. I mean, maybe you would, but if you do, we probably need to talk further. But, I mean, you think about, where does that sense come from? Well, it comes from a sense of respect for another individual. Why do we have that respect for another individual? Well, it's not because I'm atheist. It doesn't come from me believing there's no God. In fact, I would argue it comes from the exact opposite. It's because, hey, we're made in God's image and we respect that. And so because of that, we're not going to go out there and murder somebody else because we realize there is a right and wrong. But atheism does not provide a good alternative. One self-proclaimed godless unbeliever wrote that the new atheism, which has developed over the past decade or so, is an impoverished way of understanding the world that excludes meanings and values. I kind of understand. I don't understand why he's godless if he really feels that way, but it makes sense, right? Because if you look around us in the world today, if more people are really going to either be practical or intellectual atheists, you kind of see why the world's going in the direction that it's going. Because if they truly don't believe in a God, there's a lot of stuff they're just going to throw from the wayside and not really promote or good or look for the good in. As a foundation or even a reason for living a good life, atheism provides absolutely nothing to you. Number two, you see, logically, it leads to devaluing human life and morality, which we've already kind of talked about that. But the logical progression with regard to atheism is the fact that you don't respect life, you don't respect anything. And where do morals come from if you really believe there's no God? Why should you have morals? Why should there be a right or wrong? Why should there be a good or a bad? You know, if there is no God, who cares? That's what atheism gives us. So logically, atheism leads to devaluing human life and morality, and atheism is unprovable. In order to defend, I found this interesting. This is part of what he included here in this writing, and it really had never hit me before with regard to the unprovable nature of atheism. But in order to defend atheism, it's in its purest form, the fact that there is no God. If you're going to that extent, a person would have to know every single thing there is to know in order to say that there is no God, there's no proof for God, that there is no God. You're going to have to pretty much assume, just think in your minds, you got to think logically in your minds, to prove that premise that there is no God, you're going to have to know everything there is, because the one thing that you don't know might just prove that existence of God. So in order to actually get out there and argue that there is no God, the idea is you're going to have to know everything. Because what if there's one thing out there that you don't know that would then prove that there's a God that exists? So one person wrote this: the denial of the existence of God involves a perfectly monstrous hypothesis. Before one can say that the world is without God, he must first have become thoroughly conversant with the whole world. In short, to affirm authoritatively that no God exists, a man must be omniscient and omnipresent. That is, he himself must be God, and then after all, there would be one. So it's kind of interesting that if you want to try and say that there is no God, you're pretty much saying, I am God, because I'm one who I know everything. And I think that it's going to be very hard-pressed for anyone to ultimately stand with that criticism there. Does that make sense? I thought that's kind of interesting to think about the unprovable nature of that. A lot of people say, hey, we want to prove that there's God, and we can do that. I think that we have proof that there is a God. But you flip it on the backside, I want to prove atheism. Prove me there is no God. That's a much harder premise to prove when you think about it. So, all right, atheism. Any other comments, thoughts about atheism? I'll move to what just happened. Okay. I don't know what happened. Agnosticism. Oh. Did we come unplugged? Don't know what happened up here. I don't know. It was working just fine. Oh, that's working. All right, agnosticism. So, definition of agnosticism, there are a lot of different definitions, but literally the word agnostic means without knowledge. So again, you got the A of Greek, which means without, and the word gnostic comes from a Greek word meaning knowledge. And so I'm not going to get into the Greek with you too much there, but that's what that means. So a couple of definitions that we see with regard to this, just looking at Merriam-Webster's online dictionary, a person who holds the view that any ultimate reality, such as God, is unknown and probably unknowable. Broadly, one who is not committed to believing in either the existence or the non-existence of God or a God. Two, you see, it's a person who is unwilling to commit to an opinion about something. And so you see that, I think that makes kind of sense, right? It's kind of like you're stuck in the middle and you're just kind of wavering, and I don't care. Or it's very apathetic. It's very indecisive. Agnosticism is just one of the things, well, I'm not sure you really can know this, and I really don't know which way to go, and so you're kind of you're agnostic with regard to it. So that's kind of the definition. Descriptions that you see that we can look at here with regard to agnosticism. One, this term was coined in the late 19th century, so that's late 1800s. His basic argument was that both theism and atheism are not supported by enough adequate evidence to prove either position. So you're stuck there in the middle, and it'd be wrong to really go one way or the other with regard to it. So much like atheism, agnosticism can be framed in a lot of different ways. I'm not going to get through all this, so I will flip through here. And so this is one thing that I thought was good. Agnosticism is not an alternative third way going between atheism and theism. It isn't instead a separate issue compatible with both. I thought that was kind of interesting. that you would see that with regard to agnosticism, written from that viewpoint, vantage point. So with regard to agnosticism, the demographics real quickly from that same Pew Research Center, 5% of American adults say that they are agnostic. And and that's up from 3% in 2009. So I think that's very telling with regard to agnosticism. Some quick deductions with regard to it. Agnosticism is a fundamentally flawed idea. It's really just a non-decision. You're not making a choice with regard to it. So it's flawed, one, because the idea that God would have this work both ways, it's just kind of strange. I mean, how can you have it both ways with regard to there being a God or not being a God? So being incapable of or unwilling to express, for God to be incapable or unwilling to express himself to finite beings is just really, just doesn't make sense one way or the other. The non-decision, I think, is the biggest thing with regard to agnosticism, with regard to kind of being stuck in the middle and being like, I'm just not going to choose. You're kind of avoiding the question. And the question I usually would get to if someone says they're agnostic is why. Because it's really kind of why you want to get to the root of why are they agnostic. Because it's probably going to help us open that door to talk to them about God more if we kind of figure out why they are in that position. But it's really just a non-decision. So there's sometimes a root to those issues and those problems with regard to what we would have with regard to agnosticism. So can you think of anything, and any biblical examples that might fall in the category of agnosticism that y'all think about? There's two that Jeremy put in here, and I think they're good. This whole mindset of kind of being stuck between two things, not really wanting to make a decision or choice. Isabella? Who?
Agrippa?
Oh, I like Agrippa. That's not in here, though. He didn't put Agrippa. That's a good one, though. When Paul's talking to Agrippa, it's kind of like, if you were to keep talking to me, maybe, I would believe in time or whatever. I like that one. That's a good one. That's good. All right, what else? All right, here's the two that he got. First, you got Elijah in Book of and 1 Kings. You're there with the prophets of Baal, right? And so in 1 Kings 18, it's pretty much telling them that they are, even though they protest and they say that they believe in the God of Baal, but they also have this whole, this mindset of whether there may be a God as well. And so as Elijah's talking to all the people, he's saying, how long are you going to falter between two opinions? If the Lord's God, you follow him, but if Baal, follow him. But the people answered him not a word. And so it's kind of like they didn't know what to say or do. And you would think that the people who had all these signs and wonders throughout all the years and throughout all their heritage would have had some kind of a concept about God, but they didn't. They just kind of faltered. The other one here that Jeremy threw in here was the church at Laodicea. And so if you think of the church at Laodicea in Revelation chapter 3, that's the lukewarm church. And the church at Laodicea, they just couldn't decide to be hot or cold. And so they just kind of sat there. And Jesus pretty much told them that, I know your works are neither hot nor cold. I could wish that you were cold or hot. So then because you're lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will vomit you out of my mouth. It's distastable to God for people to be lukewarm. You got to decide, are you going hot or are you going cold? Are you going to make a choice or not? And so that's the concept of agnosticism, is saying, well, I just don't know if there's enough there for me to know if there's a God, so I'm just not going to make a decision or a choice. For us practically, what does that mean? If we're dealing with someone who's agnostic, how do we need to approach that? What do we need to look at? What are some ways to maybe talk to them? Just don't.
Well, like you said earlier, ask why they don't believe, and also from there address that and try to figure out ways to talk to them about that.
Okay. If someone says there's not enough proof, again, I think you go back to the proof. Let's just talk about some of the things. Let's see if we can get you over that hump. Because if someone's really struggling with, hey, which way am I going to go on that? It's going to be kind of to the root of what proof is there for me to look at and consider. And so I think first you do listen to them, figure out where they're at and what they're struggling with, because that gives you the foresight to see where can I go with this in that conversation. All right, skeptics. Here, let's go real quick. Just so I can tell Jeremy I got through a couple of these. But got skepticism. A skeptic is a person who questions the validity or authenticity of something purporting to be factual. I think we all kind of understand what a skeptic is. Skeptic is someone who just questions everything. And so, not necessarily, they're not placing their stake with regard to being atheist, They're not necessarily placing their stake and saying, hey, I'm agnostic. A skeptic is kind of a different mindset because all they're doing is being very skeptical. Right? That's the word, skeptical. A skeptic is someone who is skeptical of everything. And so they're really just, you have doubts about everything, the truth of religion, Christianity, all the elements of it. You just have this doubting mentality and attitude. And so I think there's possibility you could be a Christian skeptic even. You don't necessarily, you may be questioning some of the other things, but not necessarily the main salvation issues. So you may have that with regard to an approach and the mindset that we have about things in this world around us. Another word real quick, and again, we don't have time to go over all this because that was the second bell, but it's deism. And deism is another mindset that we have. It's not, sometimes it's not categorized or as prolific and known as being deism, but deism is the belief in a God, the existence of a God on the evidence of reason and nature only, with rejection of supernatural revelation. So, better way to put it, number 2 here. Belief in a God who created the world, but has since remained indifferent to it. And so you're going to see a deistic mindset. Even in today's world, you'll see this, is the fact that, well, God placed everything in order, and after that, he just stepped back. Well, the question with that is what about his inspired word? Where does that come into play? Or are they then questioning, maybe he gave us the inspired word, and now he's just hands off. So that attacks what? What other concepts would that attack in our Christian lives? Prayer. What else? Worship. You could be deistic if you have this belief in God that you're not saying you're atheistic, you believe in God, but a deist would be someone who believes in God, but pretty much believes that God's now hands off in the world. Well, that's a different approach, isn't it? And so deism is one of those things where you kind of have to think about how to approach that mindset and kind of go into, okay, first of all, where are you saying he detached himself? That's going to be the first question when you're dealing with deism. And then secondly, how do I confront that and how do I deal with that approach when I'm speaking to someone who is that mindset? There's a couple other isms we could have gotten into, but I knew there was no way we're getting through 60-something slides. I texted Jeremy last night. I said, do you know who you told to teach this class? I said, there's no way I can get through this. He said, well, I couldn't get through it either. I just wanted to see if you could. Appreciate y'all being here this morning. I will say, as a member here, and I know we have had limited interaction this semester, but I'm thankful to have you guys at Dalraida. I hope that, number one, that y'all's tests go well this week. I do not envy your position. I'm thankful I have no tests to take in life anymore, and I have chosen that very willingly. I went to law school, so I had a lot of tests. But I know you guys got a lot on your plates. Thankful y'all are here today. Thankful you're here in Montgomery. And as you leave, anybody not coming back next semester? Anybody graduating and moving on with life? No? Okay, good. I hope next semester you come back and be with us. I know next semester we are going to be teaching on Wednesday nights in here, and so I'm excited about that. I get to have a little more interaction with y'all on Wednesday nights. I encourage y'all to be here on Wednesday nights. Continue to come back and be here on Sunday mornings with us if you're in town and here and not at home visiting or whatever. But if there's anything we can do for y'all, please let us know. We're thankful for you. So y'all have a great holiday and be safe.
I've wondered, I haven't really noticed, but every time I'm closing stuff up, I notice everybody goes over there. Me too.
I have to ask Stephen, I'm very appreciative of it.
So does nobody drink coffee in here?
No college student. If I ever make it for adults. Yeah, I don't, really used to make that big thing, people would drink it.
Oh, yeah.
I used to do it when I was an intern, and nobody would drink it, and it's waste coffee.